I tapped lightly on the analog oxygen gauge. The O2 readings are off in engineering, I muttered to myself. Nothing ever works right here. I blame it on the low gravity. I was told it had no bearing on this equipment, so maybe I'm just cursed. I didn't always feel this way. There was a time I thought I was the luckiest person alive. I was the first and only person to ever be born on the moon. You'd think that space exploration was ingrained in my DNA. My parents were both astronauts, and my mother has spent more than her fair share of time as a researcher on the ISS. I could give a shit about my career. And my image? Let's not even go there. I am part of NASA's Artemis program, which began in the latter half of the 2020s. In particular, there was a strong interest by the United States government and its allies to determine the feasibility of birthing children off-world, and to determine the upper limits of human survival among the ravages of space and low gravity. This would be far greater than anything that was attempted before. Of course, my parents volunteered to participate in the program immediately, knowing better than most the risks that would be involved. As almost any 80s sci-fi flick will readily demonstrate, human physiology isn't adapted for extended periods in space and low gravity. Our joints expand, our hearts weaken, and our muscles waste away. Over millions of years, humanity has struck a balance with the oppressive and unforgiving force of Earth's gravity. By comparison, the anemic lunar gravitational pull is foreign, alien. Our honed bodies are simply not equipped to be off their home planet. But as a species, we won't listen. We'll just do it anyway, because why the hell not? My lunar habitat, my birthplace, and what is really my home, lies in the center of Mare Tranquillitatis, known better by my terrestrial cousins as the Sea of Tranquility. My mother and father built this habitat with a team over the course of 5 years and 8 missions, making the moon their home and eventually conceiving and giving birth to me here. The habitat is a successor to the first Artemis base camp, which landed in the mid-20s. Though technically codenamed Artemis II, I just call it the habitat. It is constructed from several modules, including the living quarters, main storage, hydroponics, research, engineering, and lunar excursion. It all sounds great in theory, and it was, when everything was new, but shit breaks down quickly in the unrelenting hostility of space. Think of my situation as living in a camper van on steroids. If something can go wrong, it will. It's only a matter of time. And ironically similar to what I'd imagine actually owning a camper van is really like, you have to rely on yourself to fix things when they break down.
Jim, O2 levels have fallen below normal bounds in engineering.
I seriously doubt that. It's probably just a faulty sensor reading Dahlia, I said.
I recommend checking the oxygen recyclers and performing a manual scan.
Like I said, nothing ever works right here. That includes Dahlia, the habitat's strong AI and central nervous system, and for what it's worth, the closest semblance I have to a housemate. The modules are connected to each other by a series of large, 4-meter wide pressurized doors. The doors form a hallway through each section, a common corridor which traverses the 100-meter length of the habitat. They don't offer much in the way of coziness, but at least it's easy enough to get around. When I was a kid, we had 6 people living full-time on the moon, including me. The habitat was the pride of NASA in the United States, and my parents and I were household names. Despite that, it was a lonely existence here, and as time went on, it got even lonelier. Slowly, public interest in the Artemis program began to dwindle, and so did our funding. One after another, the small group of people I considered to be my family began to return to Earth, until it was just my parents and I. Though my parents were determined to stay with me, They had been stationed on the moon for over 20 years, and despite all the exercise programs, supplemental nutrition, and careful planning, their bodies could no longer weather the conditions here. Shortly after my 18th birthday, they reluctantly made their preparations and returned to their real home. It was difficult to watch them go, but I understand it needed to be done. While I was not immune to the effects of low gravity, perhaps a lot of it can be attributed to my youth, it didn't seem to affect me as much as it did them, at least not physically. So why am I cursed then? Maybe cursed is a bit of an overreaction, but things have definitely been getting worse lately. The habitat has been breaking down way more than usual. I've had several malfunctions in the last few days alone. I'm dealing with a myriad of electrical failures in the engineering module. My communications link to Earth has not been functioning properly for weeks, and most perplexingly, the solar panels which line the top of the habitat have been outputting 50% less power than normal. But like I said, these sorts of problems are not new to me. The best thing to do now would be to get some rest. When I get up, I'll prioritize getting those solar panels fully operational. My living quarters are actually quite comfortable. The living quarters is the largest module in the habitat, and because it was meant to be used the most, was designed with thicker plating than the rest of the modules. It had to be this way to help shield from cosmic radiation. This module also runs on a self-contained miniature nuclear reactor, which serves as a backup to the solar cells and provides heat to the living quarters. My favorite part of the entire habitat is my full-size Dux Model 1001. Don't ask me how my parents managed to convince NASA to smuggle a Duxiana bed onto a supply run to the moon. It's a long story, but safe to say I'm thankful they managed to do it. Even though leaving was not something they wanted to do, and I think this was sort of a guilt payment in their mind, I appreciate this bed a lot. It's the one luxury item I have, and if this is indicative of how you all are living down there, I am very jealous. 1,492 springs. They are really doing their job. I was jolted awake suddenly by the habitat alarms blaring at full strength, followed by an urgent warning from Dahlia.
Warning. Containment breach in engineering. Sealing main doors.
Dahlia, what the fuck is going on? I said.
Atmospheric depressurization in engineering. Danger of habitat destabilization.
I sprang out of the bed. Seal the pressurized doors. Pull up the cameras in engineering.
Containing breach. Camera connection offline. Warning. Solar power output down to 33%. Disabling non-essential systems.
Can we start with turning off this alarm? I deem it as a non-essential system, I said. The alarms ceased abruptly, and an ostensible measure of calm came back into the room. Dahlia, are you able to pull up telemetry for that module? What are the readings?
Atmospheric pressure 3 times 10 to the negative 15 bar. Temperature 120 degrees Celsius.
Contrary to popular belief, it's not always cold on the surface of the moon. When the sun is out, the surface temperature is more than adequate to boil water, at least if there was any readily available. The readings in the module meant that it had completely depressurized. I was hoping for a failed seal or something similar, but now I was starting to think it was hit by a sizable meteoroid. That's just great, I thought. I suited up and made my way over to the living quarters airlock to make my way outside and assess the damage. So much for getting a full night's sleep. As I stepped out of the airlock, I saw something strange. Groupings of concentric rings 2 meters wide lined the surface of the habitat. They continued down the length of the habitat in a staggered fashion, around 5 to 7 meters between each set of circles. I have seen a lot of strange things before, but nothing like this. I didn't know what to make of them, but I had to ignore this mystery for now and focus on the task at hand. Slowly and carefully, I made my way down the length of the habitat until I reached the side of the engineering module. It looked intact from the side I approached. I used my magnetic grapples to make my way up the side and onto the roof. What I saw there greatly unsettled me. A hole over a meter wide was torn through the hull of the habitat. Shrapnel and debris floated gently and serenely around this violent site of impact. A larger than usual meteorite must have slammed into the top of the hull, but along the edges of the hole there appeared to be large gashes, almost like claw marks. A wave of unease washed over me. There has to be a reasonable explanation for this, I thought. I went through the hole carefully to get to the interior of the engineering module so that I could assess the damage further and locate the meteorite. Inside, there were loose tools and electronics hovering all over the module. There was plenty of floating debris everywhere, but it all seemed to be caused by the force of the explosive depressurization. I couldn't see any damage from the expected meteorite, and even more concerning, I couldn't find any meteorite at all. The unease in the pit of my stomach grew stronger, but I needed to focus. I started working on patching the hole in the habitat. Normally, I would scan the section and 3D print a custom patch specific to the damage, but the 3D printer lay inert and unusable in the depressurized environment in engineering. This was far beyond the size of anything I could print anyway. I took several sheets of aluminum composite that I had stored for structural reinforcement to use for the repair. I braced myself between a support pillar and one of the air vents on the ceiling for added stability, and began welding the sheets together. For the uninitiated, welding aluminum is a difficult task in itself, and while the vacuum of space affords me the ability to cold weld, it has its own set of issues and pitfalls. While working on the patch, I wondered how so much damage could be made with no evidence of what caused it. After about an hour, I was ready to try repressurizing the module, and I was going to need Dahlia's help. As I thought about the next steps to bring the module online, I felt a faint series of rumbles reverberate through the hull and into my body. The rumbles were several seconds apart and matched each other in intensity. What the hell? Puzzled and confused, I instinctively looked through the window of the engineering module, and I saw 2 towering pale columns outside. Those structures weren't there before, I thought. Suddenly, one of the columns began to tilt forward and rise up slowly. Every hair on my body stood up as a wave of terror and realization washed over me. The structures I was looking at weren't columns. They were legs.